Alright, so we have the user interface and all the visual elements pretty much complete. Now we need to move on to the JavaScript. Alright, now we're using the local storage API to store the to-dos in our to-do list. And it's just something that I need to kind of explain before we move forward. Traditionally, we have a local storage. We'll have a local storage variable, let's say .name, and we can set that to a value such as Brad. Alright, so by default, local storage variables hold strings. Okay, now what we want to do is basically have one local storage variable, and we'll call it to-dos. Alright, and I'm not doing any programming right now. I'm just this is just to show you. We're not going to have a local storage variable for each to-do item. It just wouldn't work like that, especially if we want to add more fields to each to-do. It's just not efficient. So what I want to do is store a JSON array that contains JSON objects, and each object will be a to-do, and we'll have set fields. Okay, so we're only doing the name and the date, but you could add more in the future. Alright, so the issue with this is that when you're using local storage, you can't natively store an array inside of a local storage variable. It has to be a string, such as Brad. Alright, so to do this we need to use a couple different functions. Alright, but first let me just show you what this variable will look like, or what the value will look like. Okay, so basically it's going to be set to an array, and inside the array we'll have JSON objects, which will be wrapped in curly braces. So let's say we'll have a key called to-do name, and then that would have a value, something like pick up kids. Alright, and then we'd have a comma, and then the next key, to do date, and then that would be some date like this. Alright, and then the next to do would have the same thing. It'll have the name. Alright, so that's how we're going to store our to-dos. And the reason for this is basically so we can iterate through them and print them out on the home page, so we can do different things with them. Alright, so I just wanted to show you the kind of format we'll be using. As for the parsing of JSON through local storage, there's a really good post on stackoverflow.com that kind of shows you what we're doing here. You can see we have a JSON object here inside of a variable, and we're going to set a local storage item called test object, and we can't just throw this in here. We have to use this JSON.stringify function. Basically that's going to turn that into a string that we can store inside of this local storage object. Alright, and then to retrieve it, you can see he's creating a variable and setting it to local storage dot get item, just like we would any local storage item. But when we use it, we're going to use this JSON.parse function so we can display it out or log it or whatever we're going to do with it. Okay, so we're going to be using these two functions, JSON.stringify and JSON.parse. Alright, so now we have a blank main.js file. Alright, so that's where we're going to do all of our JavaScript. Now I want to start with the add functionality. Alright, so basically we want a handler, and if we go back to our HTML and we go to the add page, we have it so that when we click the save button, it's going to submit the form with the ID of add form. Okay, so that's what we want to use in our JavaScript when that form is submitted. Okay, so to add a to-do, we want that form, so add form, and we're going to say when it is submitted. We're going to call a function. And what we want to do is get the values of the two fields, of the name and the date. And if we look at our form, we can see that the inputs have an ID of to-do name and to-do date. So let's get those values first before we do anything. We'll say get submitted values, and let's create variables for them. So to-do name, and we're going to set that to the element with the ID of to-do name. And we can't just do this, we need to use .val. Okay, that's going to get the value. Same thing with the date. Well, there should only be one equal sign. Alright, so that's going to give us whatever the user submits. Now, let's do a little bit of form validation. We're not going to do nothing crazy, just a couple checks. Okay, so we'll say simple field validation. Basically, let's first check and see if the to-do name is filled out. So basically check if it's blank. So we'll say if to-do name is equal to nothing, then let's just give an alert, and we'll just say please give the to-do a name. Alright, and then we're going to say else if to-do date is equal to nothing, please add a date. Okay, so checking just to see if there's anything filled out. Alright, and that's all we're going to check for right now. Obviously you could do more, but again, this is very simple app. So then we're going to say else, which means that the name and the date have been filled out. So now what do we want to do? Now we're going to actually, we want to first just check and see if there's anything inside of our to-dos local storage variable. Okay, so I'm going to say variable to-dos, and then we're going to use that JSON .parse function that we talked about, and then in here we're going to say local storage .get item, and we're going to look for the item called to-dos. Alright, so that'll put that in this to-dos variable. Now we want to check and see if there actually is anything in it. So we can check by seeing if it's null. Actually, wait a second. Check. So we can say if to-dos is equal to null. Basically, if it's not there, then we're going to create an empty array. Alright, so now what we're going to do is create a new array with our new values. Okay, so create array with new to-do. Okay, so variable new to-do is going to be equal to basically a JSON object with two fields. To-do name to-do date. And obviously we're putting in there whatever the user submitted, which comes from these variables. Okay, so there's our new array. What we want to do now is push this array into, or push this object into the to-dos array. Okay, so under here we can use the push function, so we'll just say to-dos dot push. Okay, so the main array is to-dos, but we want to push in this new array which just has our two new values. Okay, so I'll just put in here new to-do. Alright, and then finally we want to set the item. So local storage dot set item. Okay, and we want to set to-dos, and this is where we're going to use the stringify function. So JSON dot stringify to-dos. Alright, so let's save this and let's see if this works right off the bat. I'm going to open my Chrome tools because I want to be able to see my local storage. So if we click on the resources tab and then local storage, you can see that we have nothing here, no key value pair. Alright, so let's go ahead and add a to-do. Alright, so I'm going to click save, which should run our click handler. Alright, now we might have to reload. Alright, so something went wrong. Let's try that again with the console. Huh. Alright, let's go ahead and look at this. Alright, so what's going on is that we're trying to run this submit function before the actual HTML is loaded. You can see we have our jQuery, we have our JavaScripts up here before the content, and we could just cut this out and put the scripts at the bottom, but instead we can use the document.ready function, and what that does is it won't run this until the page is loaded. Okay, so it's a jQuery document.ready, and then we're going to run a function when it's ready. Okay, and then we're just going to copy everything we have and put it in there. Alright, so let's try this now. Okay, so resources, local storage, let's try and add something. Alright, perfect. So now you can see under local storage we have our key, which is to-dos, and then we have a value, which is basically an array with one object, with one to-do object, which has a to-do name and a to-do date. Alright, now if we go and add another, now you can see that that has also been added. Alright, so as we keep adding to-dos, this array will just keep growing bigger and bigger. We won't keep adding new local storage variables. That wouldn't be very efficient. This is just a much better way to do it. Alright, so that's it for adding them. In the next video we'll take this static list we have, get rid of that, and then we'll loop through these to-dos in the array and insert them into the list items.